Let's start. You are currently trapped, not in a physical cage, not behind iron bars, but inside a financial prison built entirely out of numbers. In the year 2026, millions of Americans are staring directly into the teeth of a bizarre, almost unbelievable economic glitch. They literally cannot afford to move out of their own homes. Imagine you bought a house just a few years ago, back in the golden days of 2020 or 2021. You locked in a sweet, historically low 3% mortgage rate. Your monthly payment is affordable. Life is good, but fast forward to today, and you need to move. Maybe your family grew and you need another bedroom. Maybe you got a massive promotion across the country. Maybe you just want to live closer to your aging parents. So you open up a real estate app and look at the current market. And you realize something utterly terrifying. Because interest rates have skyrocketed over the last few years, the math of everyday life has fundamentally broken. If you sell your current home and buy a new one at a 7, 8, or even 9% mortgage rate, your monthly payment will literally double. And that is for the exact same size house, in the exact same kind of neighborhood. To give you an idea of the math, a $400,000 loan at 3% costs about $1,700 a month. That same loan at 8% costs nearly $3,000 a month. That is an extra $1,300 evaporating from your bank account every single 30 days just to borrow the exact same amount of money. So, what do? You do the only logical thing. You don't sell. Your neighbors don't sell. Your coworkers don't sell. Nobody sells. The entire American housing market completely freezes solid. But it doesn't stop there, because nobody is moving. The people who want to buy their first home can't find anything for sale. So the prices of the few homes that do hit the market stay artificially sky high. Meanwhile, you go to the grocery store. The price of eggs, milk, bread, and gas is still creeping up. But your paycheck? It hasn't moved an inch. Your salary is frozen, your house is frozen, but the cost of keeping yourself alive just keeps getting more and more expensive. You are stuck. The economy is stuck. Everything is grinding to an agonizing halt, but the cost of surviving continues to climb. Economists have a name for this specific, terrifying disease. They call it stagflation. Stagnant economic growth combined with high, unstoppable inflation. Normally, an economy only does one of two things. When it is growing and people are getting rich, prices go up because everyone has money to spend. That is standard inflation. When the economy crashes and people lose their jobs, prices go down because nobody has money to spend. That is a recession. But stagflation is the mutant hybrid of the two. It is an economic cancer. It means the economy is crashing and you are losing your buying power, but prices are still shooting to the moon. It is the absolute worst-case scenario for any financial system. And the scary part? We've seen this exact ghost before. Let's rewind the clock to the 1970s. America was caught in a nightmare. Coming out of the post-World War II boom, the United States felt invincible. The 1950s and 60s were an era of massive prosperity. But behind the scenes, the government was making a catastrophic mathematical error. Politicians wanted to fund the massive, incredibly expensive Vietnam War. At the exact same time, they wanted to fund President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society social programs at home. They wanted both guns and butter, but they didn't have the tax revenue to pay for both. So what did they do? They did what governments always do. They quietly pressured the Federal Reserve to print more money. For a while, it seemed to work. But then, the illusion shattered. In 1971, President Richard Nixon officially took the United States off the gold standard. The US dollar was no longer backed by physical gold. It was now a fiat currency, backed by absolutely nothing except the promise of the government. The money printers were officially unleashed. Then came the spark that lit the powder keg. In 1973, an oil crisis hit. Foreign oil producers in the Middle East enacted an embargo against the United States. Energy prices exploded overnight. Gas lines stretched for miles. Suddenly, the cost of manufacturing, shipping, and producing literally everything shot through the roof. But the economy wasn't growing. Businesses couldn't afford the new energy costs, so they started laying people off. Unemployment was spiking. The government panicked. They had never seen anything like this. They tried everything. The Federal Reserve, under Chairman Arthur Burns, tried pumping even more money into the system to stimulate jobs, but that just made the inflation worse. President Nixon literally tried freezing prices by law. He enacted mandatory wage and price controls, making it illegal for businesses to raise their prices. But instead of fixing the problem, this just created massive shortages. Farmers stopped sending cattle to market because they couldn't make a profit, leading to empty meat shelves in grocery stores. President Gerald Ford tried a PR campaign. He printed millions of buttons that said "Win," which stood for Whip Inflation Now. He asked Americans to voluntarily stop spending money and grow their own vegetables. Unsurprisingly, a plastic button did not fix a macroeconomic crisis. The inflation virus kept mutating. It was highly contagious, and it was spreading. By 1980, inflation climbed to a staggering 14%. To put that in perspective, at 14% inflation, the value of your savings cuts in half every 5 years. People completely lost faith in the US dollar. The psychology of the entire nation broke. People realized that paper money was actively melting in their pockets, so they started spending it the exact second they got it. They hoarded physical gold. They bought real estate. They bought cans of food. They bought anything they could physically touch. The American financial system was on the verge of a total, irrecoverable psychological collapse. If the dollar died, the empire would die with it. Enter the Dragon Slayer. In August of 1979, President Jimmy Carter appointed a man named Paul Volcker as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Volcker was a giant of a man, standing 6'7". He was completely bald, spoke in a deep, intimidating rumble, and constantly smoked cheap cigars. And most importantly, he understood a dark, unpopular truth. There was only one way to kill the inflation dragon. You couldn't talk to it. You couldn't regulate it. You had to starve it to death. Volcker realized that the root cause of the entire crisis was the money supply. There was simply too much paper money chasing too few physical goods. And as long as money was cheap to borrow from banks, people would keep borrowing it, spending it, and driving prices higher. To stop it, Volcker had to make money incredibly, painfully expensive. He had to choke the American economy on purpose. On a Saturday night in October 1979, an event known as the Saturday Night Special, Volcker announced a radical change. The Federal Reserve was no longer going to try and gently manage interest rates. They were going to violently restrict the supply of money, letting interest rates fly as high as they needed to go. And fly they did. Volcker did the unthinkable. He pushed the federal funds rate, the base interest rate for the entire economy, to an astronomical 20%. Just pause and think about that number. 20%. Today, people are paralyzed by 7% mortgage rates. Under Paul Volcker, the prime lending rate hit 21.5%. Mortgage rates peaked over 18%. Imagine trying to buy a car or a house or get a loan to expand your small business, and the bank demands a 20% interest rate. It was financial chemotherapy. The results were immediate, and they were utterly brutal. The cost of borrowing money became so astronomically high that businesses instantly stopped expanding. Companies went bankrupt by the thousands. The housing market completely evaporated overnight because absolutely no one could afford an 18% mortgage. The auto industry crashed. Millions of people lost their jobs. The country was plunged into the most severe economic recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Unemployment skyrocketed to 10.8%. The American people were furious. Homebuilders mailed actual 2x4 wooden planks to the Federal Reserve headquarters, begging Volcker to lower rates so they could build houses again. Car dealers mailed the keys of unsold cars to Volcker's office. Angry farmers, drowning in high-interest debt, drove their massive tractors directly to Washington, D.C., and blockaded the Federal Reserve building. Politicians screamed at him. Congress demanded he step down. Volcker received so many death threats from desperate, ruined citizens that he was forced to hire armed guards just to walk down the street. But Volcker did not blink. He sat in his office, smoking his cheap cigars, and he kept the rates sky high. He let the economy scream in absolute agony. He knew that if he backed down, the inflation dragon would come roaring back, and the US dollar would be destroyed forever. He held the line, and eventually, the fever broke. By choking the economy half to death, the demand for goods finally collapsed. Because nobody could afford to buy anything, businesses were forced to lower their prices to survive. By 1983, the inflation rate had been crushed. It fell all the way down to a healthy 3.2%. The dollar was saved. Confidence in the American financial system was restored. The stage was set for decades of massive economic growth throughout the 1980s and 90s. Paul Volcker had saved the world's reserve currency, but the medicine had tasted exactly like poison, which brings us right back to the glitch of 2026. Today, the Federal Reserve is fighting the exact same ghost. Following the global pandemic of 2020, the government panicked. They printed trillions of dollars out of thin air. They slashed interest rates to literally 0%. They flooded the system with cheap money. And just like the 1970s, the inflation dragon woke up. To fight it, the modern Federal Reserve had to look back at history. They had to channel the ghost of Paul Volcker. They started raising interest rates at the fastest pace in modern history, hiking them up aggressively to shock the system. They didn't have to go to 20% this time. But because the world is so much more leveraged in debt today than it was in the 1970s, A jump from 0% to 5% was enough to act like a sledgehammer to the economy, and that is exactly why you are trapped in your house. That lock-in effect, the frozen housing market, the pain you feel when you look at your credit card bill or your grocery receipt, that is the medicine working. The Federal Reserve is intentionally slowing the economy down. They are deliberately making it painful for you to borrow money, buy a house, or put things on credit. They are trying to orchestrate a controlled demolition of demand to prevent the dollar from losing its value. We are living through a modern, slow-motion version of the Volcker shock. The rules of money have violently shifted. The era of free, easy money that defined the 2010s is completely dead. The people who understand this historical cycle will survive. They will adjust their spending, lower their debt, and wait out the storm. The people who expect the world to go back to 3% mortgages and free money will be crushed by the new reality. If you want to understand these hidden forces controlling your wealth, hit the subscribe button. We decode financial history so you don't get crushed by the future. The economy isn't broken, it's just resetting. And the only question is, who survives the reset?